9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR Podcast. Hello and welcome to DSR's Words Matter. I'm David Rothkopf, your host and your interlocutor, the person who connects you to the Oracle of Ornstein, Norm Ornstein. And we should call this the Oracle of Ornstein. And we have never needed to talk to Norm more than we do now, when we are at one of those moments where we've hit maximum dysfunction. Even as I say those words, Norm, I think I'm inviting that they always find a way for there to be more dysfunction. As maximum dysfunction is a term that recedes in the distance. We always think we approach it, but here we are. We have a shutdown. The president of the United States this morning, he's taking this very seriously, put out a social media post in which via AI he is rendered into the Grim Reaper, and he's ringing a bell saying the Reaper is coming. This is tied to his threats to turn this shutdown, unlike any other shutdown we've had in the past, into a political assault on his opponents. So he's cutting funding to projects in blue states, energy projects, infrastructure projects. He's threatening big cuts in personnel in the government, but they're approaching that a little more cautiously because apparently they feel that may produce some backlash. But there is backlash because the majority of people in the country blame this on the Republicans, as they should. And the Democrats have been on message on this thing. They've shown a little discipline around the healthcare issue. They want to put at the center of it. And I just want your assessment of where we are in this particular shutdown that is unlike any other shutdown.
So, David, I want to move beyond dysfunction to use 3 I words: indecent, illegal, incompetent. Illegal, let me start with that. What Russell Vought and the other members of the Trump cabinet are doing during this shutdown is illegal. They are withholding funds and canceling contracts only in blue states illegally, and firing employees when it is illegal to fire them. They are being furloughed. Indecent because among those who are not going to be furloughed are the huge number of ICE and FBI agents who are doing utterly indecent things, including, after the shutdown just yesterday, one of the most appalling things I have seen in my lifetime in America, which is a huge number of these thugs from the FBI and the ICE team descending on an entire apartment building, breaking down doors without either warrants or probable cause, taking babies and young children naked out of these apartments, including American citizens, zip tying these kids in what will be traumatic for the rest of their lives, and throwing them into vans, taking American citizens and not being concerned with looking at any of their IDs to see that they're American citizens, and throwing them into detention. All of this is going on during a shutdown that is being caused not just by Donald Trump, but by John Thune and Mike Johnson. And it is John Thune, who I, met when he was a fledgling senator from South Dakota, and viewed him basically as a pretty decent guy, a standard issue conservative, who's now turned into an amoral at best monster, who laughs when Trump puts up a vile, racist AI video of his counterpart, Chuck Schumer, and of Hakeem Jeffries, and who made sure that there would be no negotiation over the healthcare cuts that are going to destroy a lot of people's lives. And then watching one of my favorite members of Congress, the wonderful Madeline Dean, confront Mike Johnson in the corridor in the Capitol to say, you need to call out this president for his racism and recognize that he is mentally unstable. To which Johnson replied, this caught on hot mics, well, some of your people are too, and making it clear that he knows, just as his colleagues know, how awful Donald Trump is. But they all go along with this. And where we end up with this, with Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, trying to use this to blow up government illegally. And I want to add one more element of the indecency, which I learned about this morning, and that is furloughed Department of Education employees having their emails hacked by their agency so that any outgoing messages from their emails say, I can't answer because the Democrats have caused a shutdown, a violation of the Hatch Act. And we've seen many of those, including messages put up on official websites. And they're getting away with this stuff. And, we are in uncharted and really frightening territory, David. So that's how I would start. I didn't want to ruin your upbeat mood for the day, but it's my job every week when we do this.
It is true. You are Debbie Downer on steroids,
Yes.
but for good reason. But I want to pick up on a sort of under discussed element of this that you, as uh, um, our leading scholar of the Congress, may have a perspective on, but mostly that you, as somebody who knows a lot of people on the Hill, might have a perspective on it. It links to your statement about Thune, but also to the statement about Mike Johnson, because I had lunch with a guy yesterday or a couple of days ago who is, real Washington insider. He runs one of these advisory firms. He kind of a big one, and he's a decent guy. I like him a lot, and uh, he said to me that he knows Mike Johnson very well, and that they have lunch periodically, and he says Mike Johnson's a decent guy, and he said he knows what's going on here. And if you get him behind closed doors, he thinks what Trump is doing is excessive. Um, and I keep constantly hearing people who say shit like that. And you were saying it about Thune, and you know, you know, I mean, they watch the same TV, they read the same newspapers, they see what's going on. They see the videos of the babies being dragged out of places. They see the budget deficit exploding. They see the crazy anti-science lunatics at the Department of Health and Human Services, and yet people are saying, well, they're good guys. They understand. How can you be a good guy and go along with this stuff? When do we set aside the good guy benefit of the doubt that we are giving all of these people who are collaborating in this catastrophe?
So I would say almost a working definition of indecency is somebody who knows that what's going on is evil and works to make sure it continues and justifies it, lying over and over again. The fact is, Mike Johnson, whose title is Speaker of the House, is Speaker of Trump and has abandoned any of his moral standing and basically legitimacy by what he is doing. So if there is anybody who is indecent, it's Mike Johnson. And I will say, David, I've heard the same thing from people who are good friends with John Roberts, and what a good guy is John Roberts, and how, yeah, he makes some decisions that we wouldn't agree with, but he's basically a really decent guy. Well, John Roberts is going to go down if we are ever able to write the history, and God knows whether the history will be written by these evil people. But if we are ever able to write the history, John Roberts is going to go down as one of the premier villains of our time. Not only did he dismantle the Voting Rights Act and bring back Jim Crow and dismantle a century of campaign finance regulation and allow dark money by evil billionaires to dominate our political process, but he engineered not just this immunity decision, but all of the decisions that have followed that have extended the ability and willingness of Donald Trump and the people around him to do horrific and indecent things and to violate every standard. And it was the Roberts Court that at one point just sort of said tentatively, well, there is still habeas corpus. People still have their rights to be able to appeal any of these decisions, and is stood by while things like Chicago occur, while people are illegally deported and without any hearing, while those who are arrested and are American citizens ask for a lawyer and don't get the ability to call a lawyer, while we see video of a house where agents are outside and the people inside say, do you have a warrant? And are told, you watch too many crime shows, lady, then break down the door without a warrant and without any probable cause. And Roberts and the five partisan hacks alongside him not only justify it, but basically fortify it. So the idea that just because these people are really nice when you go to lunch with them or are good to their neighbors, that, for a long time, we hesitated to use the Nazi analogy. There were all kinds of people who were good to their neighbors and then betrayed their neighbors and sent them off to concentration camps. We saw this, by the way, in the former Yugoslavia, where you had Serbs and Croats living next door to each other and, turned in their neighbors to be shot. Uh, the idea that people are decent when they're doing indecent things and that you should justify that they know better but still do them, showing a level of moral cowardice which is absolutely appalling. While people who are taking an oath of office and serve on the Supreme Court allow distortions of the Constitution and fundamental rights, we call them out. We don't justify it.
Yeah, but they continue to, and the interesting thing
Yeah.
to me is they continue to do it as they did it before, as if none of what's happened in the past 9 months or what happened in the past 10 years has happened. You speak of the Supreme Court, and Roberts, is like, well, why are people so critical of the court? And then we have data that shows that this court is being used by the Trump administration as no other court has ever been used, where the administration has gone to the court more times than the past four administrations added up in 9 months, asking for permission to do things and getting it. Usually getting it on a shadow docket, which used to barely exist before, without any explanation. And when there are explanations, the explanations just don't hold water. You had this decision a few weeks ago where they said um, that it was okay to use racial profiling to round people up in the street, and Justice Kavanaugh said, um, "Well, that's okay because we know that a police law enforcement officer will treat the people the right way, and if they have evidence of their citizenship, they won't do anything bad to them." And I mean, and I can give you the other example. The reasonable Republicans, right? Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins, and they're always coming up with a rationalization so that they end up going along with this stuff. And I wonder at what point there, the outrage will emerge, because and this is a flip side of this story, of course. These are real people who are being rounded up, whose families are being destroyed. These are real people who are going to see, and the Democrats are fighting on healthcare, and I'm reading stories that the White House recognizes their vulnerability on this, that healthcare costs for millions and millions of Americans are going to go up now, that hospitals are going to get be unable to operate as they did in the past now. Millions and millions and millions of people. And I have a theory. I'm writing about this theory, so I'm just give it to you, and then you can
Yeah.
respond to it. But my theory, which has come in part out of our conversations, is, we used to talk about the silent majority, and people talk about soccer moms and whatever as the decisive groups in a vote. I saw somebody was peddling the idea that in the next election, the crucial vote is going to be weighted vest moms or some kind of craziness, and but here's who I think it's going to be, and here's who I think is going to be the downfall of these Republicans, and I would call this a group that defies characterization in any of the normal labels we use. I call it the self-interested majority.
Yeah.
I just mean people who act for the one reason that people ever really act, which is their well-being and the well-being of their families, or their sense of, what their opportunities or risks are in life. And the reality is 75, 80% of Americans, for self-interest, oppose what's being done here, because they're a person of color, because they need health care coverage, because their jobs are being destroyed in their neighborhood, because the administration is attacking their blue state, but they're not Democrats. In Illinois, there are a lot of Republicans too, right? And I just think this self-interested majority is going to be the downfall of all of these people. Um, I don't understand. I can see it. I don't understand why they can't see it.
So I actually think that either way this ends up, Democrats will win on the shutdown for precisely the reason that you mentioned. And here's what I mean. If Democrats had caved and basically said, okay, we'll continue to spend as we have, continuing resolution, then we would have seen, first of all these Medicaid cuts take effect and be devastating to hospitals and to millions of Americans. And Democrats would have gone along with it, in effect. And the Republican win machine would have obfuscated who's responsible for the horrors. And then we would have seen premiums from the Affordable Care Act skyrocket, and it would have been the same thing. By shutting down the government, by agreeing that they would not go along, they didn't shut down the government. It was Republican obduracy that did it. But by saying, we are going to stand up for your health care, what Democrats have done and what they need to do more of now, and we've said this before in these podcasts, what Democrats didn't do that they should have done was a month before we had this confrontation, every single day, every single member say over and over again in every single venue, they want to take away your health care. We won't let them. And get the message out there, because the reason that so many self-interested people have not risen up at this point, I believe, is that millions of them don't know what's happening and don't know who's responsible. They don't pay attention. And if they are paying attention, in the slightest way, instead of those like us and the active groups who watch all kinds of media, and instead of the cultists who watch Fox News and listen to talk radio, if you just sort of tap in every once in a while to so called mainstream media, you aren't going to get the sense that we are at a crisis point. They're not following this stuff, or if they are, they're trying to shoehorn it into something that this is within the bounds of normality. It just may be at the edges of it. And they're treating the shutdown as who will win and who will lose, not over what the stakes are for all of this. So a shutdown at least provides an opportunity. And what Democrats need to do now during this shutdown is to find ways to reach those large numbers of Americans who are not paying close attention, to make it clear why they stood against Trump policies, Republican policies that were going to devastate the entire healthcare system. And if in the end they have to go along with getting government running again, and it's because they've decided that they can no longer stand by while other devastation occurs. When these cuts take effect, more Americans are going to know who's responsible, who stood with them in their own self interest, and who stood with the Trumpist Republicans, the John Thune, Mike Johnson Republicans, all of them in the end, who said, sure, we'll take away your health care because that's what Donald Trump wants us to do. At the same time, David, I think going back to an evergreen for us, when people elected Trump and Republicans under the promise that they would blow up government, it was people not realizing that government acts in their self interest. It was, hey, whatever government does is for them, and we're the ones paying for it. And now we need a massive education, and some of it's going to come through trauma and hardship as people begin to realize what government does for them. Uh, I was talking to somebody who works for FEMA the other day. What a catastrophe we have there. And when we have more devastating floods and storms and fires, and the federal government isn't there to step in and help people out, I hope enough of them realize that it's because of what Donald Trump and Russell Vought and their other radicals have done to destroy the capacity of government to help people when they're in need.
I hope so. I hope that we still are, we have the avenues of response, electoral response and others that we have now. Some of the tools that we used to have are going away, right? The mainstream media, which used to call these people to account, which they railed against in past administrations, that's gone. We have the news this week that CBS News is being taken over by an apologist for the right wing, Barry Weiss. We have, that they're now, the same company is now, eyeballing CNN, and we've seen newspaper after newspaper fall. That guardrail is gone. The guardrail of decent voices in the Congress is gone. The guardrail of the Supreme Court is gone. And we're left with elections, and we already know that they're trying to rig the elections. They're going to whether it's by gerrymandering or by changing campaign finance laws or by changing voter ID laws or by changing or sending troops into cities so that they intimidate people from going out and voting. And don't underestimate the degree to which sending ICE out is an effort to take anybody who feels they might be rounded up wrongly, American citizens, they're going to stay home. They're not going to go and get involved in the civic discourse in their cities. And I just, though it sure does look like the midterms are our last best hope. And if they are conducted fairly, what's your feeling about it? We're about a year out. What's your feeling about whether that's going to actually happen that way or not?
I'm increasingly nervous, and it's for a couple of reasons. We saw Trump in his incoherent and unhinged talk to our military leaders, put on by the utterly vile Pete Hegseth, um, talk about sending troops in to conduct war against democratic cities. So, and then we see what's happening with ICE. One of the things that really worries me is that we are not going to have a free election no matter how much we try. And we are going to see, I will make a prediction right now, in areas where they've tried to curtail mail in voting, where they're finding ways to reduce the number of polling places. And we're going to have long lines in areas where there are substantial numbers of Hispanics and other people of color. And we're going to have ICE invade those areas, pull people who are citizens waiting to vote out of line, detain them, first of all, beat them up while they're there, with the idea being that the other people waiting in line are going to disappear, uh, citizens or not, fearing that it will happen to them and their lives will be destroyed or at least disrupted. And they're going to find other ways. And, the gerrymandering is one small part of all of that. So I worry about that. I also want to, just for a moment, address the media stuff. I had my latest piece in the New Republic this week has been about media concentration. And I actually started by going back in my time machine to the 1990s when President Clinton picked me to co chair a presidential advisory committee on the public interest obligations of digital television broadcasters. Digital television was new, and it was the idea was we had public interest obligations. Radio and television broadcasters had been given for free public airwaves worth billions, now many much more than billions, and in return they were supposed to act in the public interest, and there was a certain set of obligations. Whether they followed them in the breach or not, the obligations were there, and we were to update those obligations and try and make sure that things could work in the digital age. We had broadcasters, we had public interest people, we had other top people. We had Cass Sunstein, the great law professor at Harvard, who drafted for us a new set of updated public interest obligations. And all the broadcasters said, we don't need to have this enforced upon us. We will do it voluntarily. And they did nothing. They had enough support. Our mandate was to try and reach a consensus. The consensus watered things down. We had promises, almost in blood, that they were going to do stuff. I worked with Walter Cronkite and the great journalist Paul Taylor. At that point, just one small thing. It was just pledge and follow through that in the 30 days before an election, 30 days, 5 minutes a night, in the broadcast night from 5 o'clock till 11:30, you can do anything you want with that 5 minutes, but it has to be about politics and the election and the campaign. Educate people, do mini debates, give a minute of free time to candidates who otherwise would not be able to get any airwaves. Oh yes, of course, almost none of them did anything. So even back decades ago, it was clear that broadcasters had no sense from what had been the pioneers in the past that they had a public interest obligation. It was all about the money and knowing that they could violate with impunity. Now we fast forward. We have 5 companies who control 90% of these entities. And as you alluded to, it might soon be 4 companies. We have, because of what's happened in the digital age, newspapers that struggle and can't make it. We thought that the benevolent billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who would rescue us by taking the signature papers like the Washington Post and the LA Times and use them to promote the public interest, even if they weren't going to be able to make money. And of course, it turned out that it's all about their money and their other interests. So we have no guardrail in our public media, with some notable exceptions. The New York Times actually has not been purchased by one of these billionaires who will sell it out for their own other economic interests. For all of its warts, it's done a commendable job. We have people like Lawrence O'Donnell and Ali Velshi, who are, being courageous out there, even if the audiences they reach are not that broader audience that we hope to reach. We have a feckless White House press corps. We have a group of congressional Republicans, as we've talked about. Many, like Mike Johnson, might know better. It doesn't change their behavior one iota. The same with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who have a kind of wink and a nod arrangement with Thune and the other leadership, that they can vote against them when it won't matter, but will vote with them when it does. And that puts us in a really bad place. And even worse is that they are not just going up to the edge of legality. These villains, these evil people, are crossing over into straightforward, unconstitutional, and illegal actions and are getting away with it. So we have to hope that the midterms will provide something different. We have to work night and day, and everybody listening should support organizations doing election protection. But we've got an uphill battle here. We are not just sliding into autocracy, we are sprinting into autocracy. And our hope is that, this interesting columns this week, Substacks by Paul Krugman and Elliot Morris, about Trump's public opinion standing being in the dumps and worse than any other president at this stage of a presidency since we've been measuring them, and whether there is a point at which his approval rating drops where some of these self-interested moral cowards decide that it is more in their interest to get a little distance from him. But 40% isn't going to do it. It will take, I think, a complete collapse of our economy, more instances of people dying or suffering mayhem because of measles, polio outbreaks, another pandemic where they are ill equipped to deal with it, listeria and E. coli outbreaks because they've blown up public food safety guardrails, along with healthcare collapsing. Maybe that will take some of that 40% who support Trump down to 30% or 35%. Maybe we'll see a change in behavior, but I'm not counting on that or on any of it. We're in a very bad place, David.
No, yeah, there's no question about that. There's one more thing I'd like to talk to you about, but this is the point where we say to everybody who's
Yep.
listening, who's in the general public, thank you very much for listening. But we're getting into the bonus portion of this, and that's for members only. And if you want to hear it, you should become a member. It's only a few bucks a month, and frankly, given what Norm just said, you need to support, and we don't have to be the only place, but you need to support independent media, because independent media is where you're going to hear the truth and expert perspectives, and that's what we try to bring. If you want to support us, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click on membership. A few bucks a month will help us, and it also get you a lot of bonus content like that, which is about to happen. However, you're not a member yet. We'll see you when you are. And if you are a member, stand by. Okay,
And
so
let me know, David, just before we go with that, you used to say, and often do, it's the price of a latte.
yes.
Well, given that coffee prices have now soared because of the tariffs, it's the price of a half a latte.
Um, yeah, you dropped out, and I missed that. And frankly, I would have learned a lot because I've never had a cup of coffee in my life, for no reason. I don't really know why I have never had a cup, and it's not really what we're here to discuss. There's one other thing though that gets me, Norm, and it's a little sensitive, so it's better we do it here behind the paywall. Um, there's a lot of people out there who are define themselves as centrists. Some of them are never Trumpers.
Yeah.
Some of them just like calling themselves centrists. Some of them are old new Democrats who are out there with prescriptions that I think are really troubling. They're saying, well, the left is the problem. It's the left's wokeness that got us into where we are now. It's the left's concern for trans people that has got us where we are right now. The left is out of touch. The left is the elite, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, this is, ludicrous on many levels, and the GOP and MAGA is, talk about elites, is run by billionaire elites, and compassion doesn't really seem to me to be the downfall of the Democratic Party. But they are fighting a fight to sort of restore, what I remember from when I was in the Clinton administration, which is kind of a third way, which is real comfortable for Wall Street and corporate interests, and lets a lot of other people down. And one of the techniques that this group uses is, they minimize the threats posed by Trump. And I saw one particular case where, with regard to this outrageous speech that he made on Wednesday about sending troops in to American cities and declaring war, essentially, on anybody who is opposed to him in the United States of America. I saw a couple of people saying, well, that's just Trump bloviating. And let's not overreact to Trump. And let's not alienate Trump supporters by overreacting to this kind of stuff. Well, clearly you're not worried about alienating Trump supporters because you tell it like it is. But I'm wondering, what do we do with these people? What do we do with a center that wants to go and create divisions within the anti-Trump coalition at precisely the moment we don't need that kind of division? It's why I talk about the self-interested majority. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. If you got health care and you're not going to get health care now, that's what matters. If you have the right to vote and you don't now, that's what matters. If you have the right to free speech and you don't now, that's what matters. We're beyond politics. We're beyond those labels. We're at the point where individual lives are being fucked up royally. And the mealy mouthed middle is driving me a little crazy, and I wonder what you think.
I think you're absolutely right. And people who uh, say or believe or both that this is really no different than Trump's first term, and we'll get by it and we'll be just fine, and that the problem is the left, are utterly misguided. But it's not just those who are self-described centrists, David. I mentioned this before, but I want to do it again. I've known Ezra Klein since he was a very young guy who first came to Washington, and and was a wunderkind, and was doing incredible stuff, and has of course soared into the stratosphere of credibility in a lot of ways. But not only saw what he wrote, but watched him justify a lot of it on a podcast with Tim Miller. And I'm not talking about the praise for Charlie Kirk, for which he has gotten a lot of pushback from the left. And he is a self described, very progressive guy, a guy of the left. But he has said Democrats need to actively recruit a bunch of pro life people to run for office. And his point was, back in the Obama era, we had 40 or so members of the Democratic Party in Congress who were pro life, like Brad Stupak of Michigan. Back then, we had Senate seats from places like Montana and West Virginia and North and South Dakota. And now they're all Republican. And the implication was it was because Democrats had put up leftists in places, and that's true of House districts, where where it wasn't going to work. And my response to that, fairly mild, but I would get less mild now, is one, don't tell me that John Tester was too liberal for Montana. Uh, Don't tell me that Joe Manchin was too liberal for West Virginia. Uh, don't tell me that Tim Johnson was too liberal for South Dakota. What's happened in these states is tribalism. And as tribalism began to take over, the ideology of Democrats running was meaningless. It was people who are going to vote for a Republican because Democrats are the enemy and they're trying to destroy our way of life. And in fact, what matters is not dividing the Democratic party by trying to recruit people whose views are going to be anathema to a whole lot of Democrats, but by focusing on the self interest of what matters. And we've seen this, just to pick one good example, with a state Senate seat in Iowa that had been very heavily for Trump, that was won handily by a Democrat in a special election with the theme of affordability, which is what is on most people's minds. Why has Mondami soared in New York? Because his focus in an extraordinarily well run campaign was on affordability. It doesn't matter so much what the ideology is, unless people say things that are, going to be devastating across the board. What matters is getting good candidates who focus on what matters. And they might be very far off to the left, and they might be closer to the center left, or they might even be in the center in some places. But the idea that you're going to divide the party, or that the problem is that the party has gone too far left, ignores the reality. The Republican Party has gone into extremist, right wing, not conservative territory. And the Democratic Party is basically still, even if it's moved a little bit, a center left party. And the number of people who are off in the extreme is a trace element in terms of elected officials or even of candidates in most places. And it's self defeating to go in the direction, these recommendations that you've mentioned, that are coming not just from centrists, but from those who are well meaning but misguided progressives in an area like this.
Yeah, well, and that's right. I totally agree with you. It's like, people are, oh, Mamdani is the threat. No, no. What you're saying when you say that is that the people of New York City are the threat. That you don't, that's what their will is. That's what they want. And, the people in Montana want something different from what the people in New York City want. But there are some things everybody wants. There are some things out there that don't fit into these sort of neat little boxes that the media tends to want to use, that everybody wants. And I've said this before, and it's my hobby horse, and it's tied to this self-interested majority thing. Do what percentage of Americans want fairer taxes? 75, 80%?
Yeah.
What percentage of Americans want reasonable gun control? 80, 90%?
90.
What percentage of Americans want health care for everybody? A vast majority. What percentage of Americans want to protect the environment so that our kids have it to use? But 75 or 80%. That well, it doesn't matter what labels those people have. There is a vast majority in America, a super majority in America, for an agenda that makes sense for everybody. And it comes back to something we talked about, quite recently, and that is um, that um, if we focus on the problems we all want to solve, not on the problems with our leaders, but the problems we all need to solve for our own lives, we will always be speaking to the majority. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to afford health care. Everybody wants a decent education. Every American with a child wants that child to get free preschool, child care. These are things everybody wants. And there's a political class that's trying to ideologize these things. But here's what I think. I think most Americans don't have a political ideology. I think most Americans don't give a shit about labels. I think most Americans get up and go to work, try to make some money to be able to afford a house and food and a decent future for their family. And honestly, I think the political class has lost sight of it for all their rhetoric about it.
One of the problems, we have a problem that 35% of Americans, the ones who are with Trump, even if he, mowed down Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, um, basically believe that what's most important is keeping those evil Democrats from assuming power. And we're not going to change that. And they'll go along with anything that Trump does. Um, we have another 15 or 20%, 15% who voted for Trump. And many of them voted to make sure that Republicans would have majorities in the House and Senate, not just because they thought that government doesn't do anything for them. They were rewarding obstructionism and obduracy done by Republicans because they didn't see government as working and certainly not doing anything for them. And where Democrats have fallen short, and this is to reinforce what you've said, is not to stand up forthrightly over and over again, supporting and promoting policies that are wildly popular among Americans. We can go back, and this is something we discussed in detail in the past, to Biden's Build Back Better bill. And instead of giving a meaningless slogan, alliterative slogan, Build Back Better, if Biden had focused on what was in that bill, every policy of significance, subsidized childcare, free community college, the child tax credit, all of those things extraordinarily popular with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And most Americans had no idea what was in this bill. It all became about whether you would get the horse race, 3 trillion, 2 trillion. Will you get it done at all? Will you get Joe Manchin to go along with it? And if Democrats had pounded away at that, and now if Democrats would use the tools available to them in Congress and out, I'll go back to my evergreen proposals, set up a shadow cabinet and a shadow government. Every night have a message group with members of Congress and state officials with a message for the next day. That message should be taken up on the floor in Congress, in committees, in every outlet, including social media you can find, about what they're doing to healthcare, about what they're doing to education, about what they're doing to the climate, about what they're doing to undermine the economy and the fundamentals. And if you align yourself with those popular positions, but also show you're fighting for America, the problem that Democrats have now is Republicans are not popular. Trump is underwater. Democrats are viewed by Americans, including their own Democrats, as feckless. It's why, one, it was far better for them to take a stand now and let the government shut down. And two, why these centrists who are trying to divide the base are making it more difficult rather than less difficult to fight back against these horrors.
Ain't it the truth? And what strikes me just as a final point, but the concentration of media that you were talking about and the death of local media has had a negative effect on journalism because you have fewer journalists covering these stories, and they tend, as by nature, to cover them from the Washington perspective because it's easier to live here and have a list of people you call and do the access journalism. Problem is that there's nobody out there covering healthcare for your grandma. There's nobody out there
Yeah.
covering what's happening in Toledo, Ohio, or what's happening in along the border, or what's happening in these various states, and and somehow synthesize that and then bring that back. That's what a big newspaper used to do, right?
Yep.
And people, and not as much as it should have, but the problem is the American people are getting cut out of the equation of their own politics.
Yeah.
And somehow it's got to be brought back in. And I go back, we talked about this a year ago, but you during the election kept saying, "Dude, go to high schools." Remember, you were like, let's
Yeah.
go out, let's talk at high schools. This is, we got to get that back, because hot flash for America, your leaders have failed. Pick a party, they've failed. They are not going to save you. The people who are going to save you are you, citizens, individuals. There's the highest job in the United States government, the most powerful job is citizen. The president reports to the citizens. And either we step up to that responsibility or we lose those prerogatives, and it's on us. And I think that's where there's got to be a tipping point.
Good place to end.
Well, and a good place to begin, I hope. But we'll keep
Yes.
this conversation going, as grim as it sometimes is, because sometimes it leads us in the right direction here, and we know that you guys find it popular, and we're glad for that. So, thank you, Norm, and I wish you a good weekend. Thank you, everybody, and we'll be back here with all the stuff that we do at the DSR Network each and every day. So join us. Bye bye.